There are stories that entertain us, stories that make us laugh, and then there are stories that quietly change us. What if I told you that love could wait not for days, not for months, but for years, without ever asking for anything in return? Welcome to Veil Marks, where we uncover the invisible threads that bind hearts, even when time and memory try to tear them apart. This is not just another story. This is a lesson in patience, loyalty, and the kind of love that never forgets. Watch until the very end. The message is deep, the ending unforgettable. In a quiet pocket of rural America, far from the sirens and city lights, there sat a small animal shelter tucked between a dusty cornfield and a winding two-lane road. The place was modest, an old barn converted into kennels, with chipped paint on the walls and wind chimes made from tin cans swaying gently by the front porch. Most dogs there came and went, finding homes or at least a hopeful spot on someone's adoption list. But not Max. Max was a large, muscular pit bull with a cinnamon brown coat and eyes the color of burnt amber, and for 3 years he had laid in the same exact spot, curled against the wooden frame of a tall window that overlooked the gravel road out front. He didn't bark much. He didn't whine. He didn't wag his tail at visitors like the other dogs did. Max simply waited. No one at the shelter quite understood him at first. When he was first brought in, found wandering alone on a roadside near a burned-out pickup truck, he had no tags, no microchip, and no known owner. They patched up a few scrapes and fed him well, but he didn't respond with the usual signs of relief or joy. He just lay there silent, watchful. It was the window he chose, not the people. Every day, without fail, Max would rise shortly before noon, stretch his powerful limbs, and position himself at the window like a statue carved from loyalty itself. He'd rest his chin on the sill, eyes focused on the stretch of road outside, as if waiting for something or someone that the rest of the world had already forgotten. What struck the staff the most was how reactive he became only in one specific scenario. Whenever a certain type of vehicle, a blue pickup truck, rumbled down the road, Max would suddenly leap to life. His ears would perk up, tail thumping wildly, and he would rush to the door, barking not in alarm, but in joy, his body vibrating with anticipation. And then, just as quickly as he had stirred, he would return to the window, disappointed, quiet, almost apologetic. It wasn't every truck. It wasn't even every blue one. It was something about the sound, the cadence of the engine maybe, or the way it slowed just slightly in front of the shelter, that triggered something in him. Some memory that hadn't yet faded, some hope that hadn't yet died. Max did this for 3 years. He refused to play in the yard with the other dogs. He ignored most visitors who came with leashes and treats, hoping to give him a new home. Some even signed the papers, wanting to adopt him because of his calm demeanor and soulful eyes, but Max would always return. Refused to eat, refused to connect, as if his heart had already chosen its person, and the rest of the world was just background noise. The shelter workers came to call him the window watcher, not because it sounded poetic, but because it was true. He was the first thing they saw when unlocking the front door in the morning, and the last when locking up at night, his body still, his eyes pressed to the glass. Unmoved by time, children who visited would whisper to each other, wondering if he was under a spell, or maybe guarding something no one else could see. Some of the older staff would joke that he was watching for a ghost, but deep down everyone knew Max was waiting for someone real, someone who had once loved him and whom he had not stopped loving in return. That kind of devotion was rare, painful, even. There were moments when staff tried to coax him out of it. They brought him new blankets, rearranged his corner, tried to encourage interaction. One kind woman even placed a small potted plant near his spot, hoping to brighten the area, but Max would gently nose it aside, making room again for his full view of the window. Maybe he's not just watching, one caretaker mused one day. Maybe he's remembering. And what if he was? What if every car that passed reminded him of a ride he once took with the windows down, wind in his face, and a man at the wheel who whistled old country songs? What if the window was more than glass and wood to him? What if it was the last place he saw home? No one knew. and Max wasn't talking. But as the seasons passed, the leaves turned, the snow fell, the fields around the shelter grew golden, then green again. Max stayed, still watching, still waiting. There was something haunting about it, something achingly human, in how still he remained, how hopeful he continued to be, the kind of silent promise that said, "I'll wait here, no matter how long, until you come back." The world moved on, but Max didn't, not once. And behind that unwavering gaze through the old glass, the question remained burning, unanswered. What was Max really waiting for? A familiar face? A warm voice calling his name? Or perhaps a promise once whispered on a quiet country road, a lifetime ago, "Wait for me." And Max did. He waited. Still, no one at the shelter really knew where Max had come from. On paper, he was listed as a stray picked up along the side of a remote stretch of interstate just past the county line. He had been found lying in the dirt, not far from the charred remains of what looked like an old pickup truck, smoke still curling from its engine block. When the fire crew arrived, Max wasn't injured, not in the way they expected. Just a few cuts and bruises. No broken bones, no burns. He hadn't run, hadn't fought. He was just there, sitting still, silent. When the rescue worker crouched beside him, unsure if the dog was feral or frightened, Max didn't flinch. He looked up slowly, like a soldier waiting for orders that never came. There was something about the way he sat tense, unmoving, watching the wreckage that stayed with the man who found him. It was as if Max wasn't lost. It was as if he'd been left behind. They brought him in late that night, wrapped in an old emergency blanket, and placed him in an open pen at the far end of the shelter. He didn't resist, didn't bark or growl, just settled into the corner nearest the window and curled his body into a tight ball. There was one strange detail that almost went unnoticed. A singed piece of green cloth knotted loosely around his neck. It looked like a piece of an old scarf or bandana, stained with dirt and ash. When one of the staff gently unwrapped it, they found faint black letters etched into the fabric, just barely legible through the smoke damage. "Wait for me." Those 3 words. It didn't mean much at the time, just a quirky discovery, perhaps left by a previous owner or scribbled as a joke. The cloth was logged and stored in a plastic bag in the shelter's lost item box, a forgotten artifact like so many others. But for Max, that piece of fabric might as well have been a sacred oath, because Max didn't forget. Over the following weeks, families came and went, looking for the right companion to take home. There were golden retrievers and lab mixes with playful eyes, eager to leap into the arms of their next chapter. Max didn't move. Even when offered fresh treats or gentle hands, he remained distant, polite, but unreachable. It wasn't aggression. It wasn't fear. It was absence. Max wasn't waiting for love. He was waiting for a specific love, one that had promised to come back. Some staff believed Max had been abandoned, that whoever owned the blue pickup truck, now a rusted skeleton in an impound lot, had simply left him behind in the chaos of the crash. But Max's eyes told another story, not of betrayal, but of loyalty, so deep it refused to accept an ending. He had already chosen his person, and until that person returned, no substitute would do. There's a strange kind of pain in watching someone or something cling to hope long after the world has moved on. Max would react with a spark of recognition every time a blue truck rumbled down the road outside. It didn't happen often, maybe once every few weeks, but when it did, the change in him was immediate. He'd shoot to his feet, ears pricked, heart pounding in visible rhythm beneath his chest. For a moment, he was alive. And then, as the truck passed or turned away, that light inside him would dim again. He'd walk slowly back to his window spot, settle down, and rest his head on the sill, eyes open, still watching, still waiting. The staff stopped trying to coax him out of it after a while. They let him have his window, his corner, his silence. A few even came to believe that Max had a purpose, that he wasn't broken or depressed, but faithful, that he was keeping a promise. Dogs don't keep time the way humans do. They don't count birthdays or anniversaries or measure grief in months and years, but they remember smells, voices, the rhythm of footsteps, and the sound of a familiar engine pulling into a driveway. And some dogs, like Max, remember promises, "Wait for me." Those words may have been a farewell, or maybe a command, or maybe a desperate hope whispered in the smoke and chaos of a moment neither man nor dog fully understood. But Max heard it, and he obeyed. 3 years. 3 years of watching the road, of flinching at the sound of gravel crunching under tires, of perking up every time hope disguised itself as a blue truck. Max didn't need a leash. He didn't run, didn't wander. The world had nothing he wanted, except for that one return, and so he waited through thunder and snow and blistering summer heat, through holidays and kennel cleanings and volunteers who came and went. Max stayed exactly where he believed he needed to be. His mission was not over. Perhaps that's why his story began to change people. The staff stopped thinking of him as a lost cause and began to speak of him with reverence. Parents brought their children to visit him, telling them about loyalty and patience. A few even cried quietly in the hallway, watching him sit at that window, unmoved, unshaken. What was he holding on to? What did he know that they didn't? Perhaps only Max truly understood what that promise meant. But even if the rest of the world had forgotten the man behind the wheel of the blue truck, Max hadn't, because when a dog gives you their heart, they don't take it back, not even when you disappear. And Max had never let go. Eliza had never planned on returning to the countryside. The slow pace, the quiet, the endless fields that looked like they stretched all the way to yesterday, it used to make her feel trapped. She had always dreamed of city lights, of fast trains and high ceilings, of coffee shops with strangers, and nowhere to be but everywhere at once. But after her father passed away, none of that seemed to matter. He had been sick for almost a year, lung cancer, that spread faster than the doctors had expected. Eliza stayed through it all. She took leave from work, left her apartment in Boston, and moved back in with him during his final months. Their days were simple tea, old music, the crackle of a radio station no one else listened to anymore, and always the waiting for medicine to kick in, for pain to ease, for news, for silence, for the inevitable. After he was gone, Eliza didn't return to the city. She packed up what little she had left and drove south until the skyline faded behind her. She found a room for rent in a sleepy town near where her grandmother once lived, and signed up as a volunteer at a small animal shelter on the edge of town. She told herself she needed the routine, something to keep her hands busy while her heart learned how to beat without him. On her third day at the shelter, she met Max. He was lying by the window, like always still, unreadable, and watchful. One of the older volunteers nodded toward him with a half smile and said, "Don't take it personally. He doesn't care for people." Just the window. But Eliza didn't take it personally. She understood the stillness, the way Max didn't flinch or follow her movements. It reminded her of those last afternoons with her father when he no longer spoke much, but would sit in his favorite chair and look out the same living room window for hours, not asleep, not distracted, just watching, waiting. And there it was again, in Max, that same stare, heavy but not lifeless, still full of memory, maybe even hope, but dulled by time and absence. Eliza didn't speak to Max at first. She didn't try to win him over with treats or soft voices. She simply took a chair from the break room and dragged it quietly across the room, placing it a few feet from his corner. She opened a paperback she'd been trying to finish for months and began to read, the words barely registering in her mind. Occasionally, she looked up, not at Max, but out the same window he was watching. The first few days, Max didn't move, but on the fourth afternoon, as the sun dipped behind the pine trees across the road, Eliza felt a shift. Max, without a sound, stretched his front legs, stood, and then slowly lay back down, this time with his back gently brushing her boots. It wasn't much, but it was something. From then on, their afternoons became a quiet ritual, Eliza would arrive, hang her coat, pour a cup of tea from the communal kettle, and sit beside Max. Sometimes she read. Sometimes she wrote in a small, leather-bound journal she kept tucked in her bag. Other times, she said nothing at all, letting the silence sit between them like an old friend. As the weeks passed, Max began leaning against her knee. A soft, unassuming pressure, his body warm, his breathing slow. Not a dog seeking comfort, but one sharing space. Eliza never tried to change him. She didn't ask him to play or beg for attention. She simply let him be. And in return, Max gave her something she didn't even know she needed, a companion in grief. It was strange, she thought, how you could feel closer to someone who never spoke than to people who called every day with all the right words. Max didn't ask how she was doing. He didn't suggest therapy or prayer or long walks. He just sat there, present, still, watching the same road, maybe waiting for the same kind of return. One day, as a late autumn wind rustled the trees and made the old window creak, Eliza caught herself whispering, "I miss him." Max turned his head slightly, the softest motion, and rested it on her shoe. And that was it. No reply. No fix. Just knowing someone else missed something too. Sometimes Eliza wondered what it was Max remembered. A face? A voice? A home? She imagined him riding in the passenger seat of a blue truck, ears flapping in the wind, music playing from a scratchy stereo. She imagined someone rolling down the window and saying, "Wait here, buddy. I'll be right back." And Max loyal, steady Max had taken those words to heart. That thought stayed with her, more than she expected. If someone waited for me like that, she thought one evening as the sun cast long gold streaks across the shelter floor, if someone loved me enough to stay in the same place for 3 years, would I come back? The question sat heavy in her chest. Eliza knew grief, but Max knew loyalty, the kind that didn't flinch, the kind that didn't fade with time or circumstance. She hadn't believed in that kind of devotion lately, but Max made her want to. He never asked her to carry his pain, but in a way, he helped her carry her own. They were two souls sitting beside a window, one remembering, the other trying not to forget. And somehow, in that quiet corner of a weathered little shelter, both of them were healing, not quickly, not loudly, but truly. It was an ordinary Tuesday morning when Eliza stumbled across the box. She hadn't meant to find anything. She was just cleaning out the old supply closet behind the kennels, trying to make space for a new stack of donated blankets and food bags. Most of what she found was typical shelter clutter, faded vaccination forms, outdated brochures, chew toys too worn to reuse. But then, beneath a pile of dusty paperwork and bent clipboards, she found a plastic storage bin that hadn't been touched in years. The label had long since peeled off, but curiosity nudged her to pop the lid. Inside, time had collected itself. Old intake forms, patient tags, a broken collar, a faded Polaroid of a beagle once adopted, a few medical records stained with age. At the bottom, wrapped in a clear evidence sleeve, was a piece of cloth frayed, smoky green, scorched along the edges. Her heart skipped. She pulled it out carefully and read the faint words across it. "Wait for me." The handwriting was shaky but deliberate, written in permanent marker across a scrap of fabric that looked like it had once been part of a military uniform or scarf. Eliza's breath caught in her throat. It had to be the same cloth Max had worn around his neck when they found him recorded briefly in his intake report, but never followed up. She sat down right there on the concrete floor, her back against a stack of dog crates. The cloth spread across her lap, like a forgotten whisper. Who had written those words? Who had they been meant for? Her mind immediately returned to Max, always watching, always waiting. Her hands trembled a little as she folded the cloth back and slipped it into her jacket pocket. That afternoon, after sitting by the window with Max as usual, she opened her laptop and began searching. She started with the obvious blue pickup truck, Pitbull, veteran, dog traveling companion. The results were vague, buried in forums and abandoned blogs, but Eliza didn't give up. She kept searching, day after day, cross-referencing dates, keywords, even satellite images from the crash area to locate anything that might connect Max to anyone, and then, finally, a glimmer on a forgotten video sharing site buried under years of digital dust. She found a short clip titled "Me and the Big Guy, Day 49. She clicked. The video opened with the hum of tires on pavement and the angle of a dash cam swaying slightly. A man was at the wheel, late 50s, maybe early 60s, with silver hair under a ball cap and deep creases in his sunburnt face. Beside him sat a large Pitbull, head out the window, tongue lolling, pure joy in motion. The man laughed as the dog barked at the wind. "This guy," he said to the camera. "Best co-pilot I ever had." Eliza stared. That face, that dog. It was Max. Or it had to be. The man's name, according to the profile attached to the video, was Sam Carter, a retired Army mechanic turned long-haul trucker. The channel included clips of him and his dog traveling across states, sleeping in truck stops, fishing by rivers, even dancing awkwardly to country music in front of diners. It wasn't a popular channel, only a few dozen views per video, but the love in every frame was undeniable. The last upload was 3 years ago. No goodbye video. No farewell message. Just a sudden stop. Eliza's chest tightened. Her gut told her that this was the story, that Sam was Max's person. The man who had once told his dog, "Wait for me." Digging deeper, Eliza followed breadcrumb trails from Sam's veteran ID number, mentioned in a comment thread, eventually tracing a mention of him in a local news article about a highway accident. According to the report, Sam's truck had veered off the road in a storm and caught fire. He had survived, but just barely. Head trauma. Smoke inhalation. Doctors described his memory as selective and scattered, with long-term gaps that still hadn't returned. He was now residing in a VA rehabilitation center, nearly 300 miles away. The news hit Eliza like thunder. Max hadn't been abandoned. He hadn't been forgotten. Sam had simply lost him. Max had waited, faithfully, at the last place they'd been together while Sam, broken and disoriented, likely believed his best friend was gone forever. The next morning, Eliza didn't tell anyone at the shelter where she was going. She packed an overnight bag, brought an extra blanket, and filled a thermos with warm broth for the road. Max didn't fuss when she led him to her car. He stepped into the back seat with calm, deliberate movements and sat upright, staring out the window. The miles began to blur together, country roads folding into highways, trees and signs passing like scenes in a forgotten memory. Eliza glanced at Max in the rearview mirror more than once. He hadn't barked, hadn't shifted. He just watched, silently, steadily, as though he knew, as though something deep inside him had stirred the moment the journey began. By the second hour, Max had gently rested his head against the window pane, eyes wide, posture alert. Eliza felt a chill, not of cold, but of something sacred. The past was calling, and Max was ready to answer. The VA Rehabilitation Center stood quietly beneath a canopy of old oaks and fading sky, a place where time seemed to slow on purpose. The building was weathered but cared for, with a garden out back where some of the residents sat in wheelchairs or walked the same path over and over again, as if chasing something they'd forgotten. Eliza pulled into the visitor lot just before sunset. The golden hour painted everything in warm tones, the trees, the benches, even the glass doors she stepped through with Max walking silently at her side. The receptionist looked up. "You here for Mr. Carter?" Eliza nodded. "He's out back, near the east fence. He likes the quiet at this hour. Just be gentle. He has good days and bad ones." Eliza thanked her and turned to Max. He didn't hesitate. He moved beside her with steady purpose, his steps slow but deliberate, his eyes scanning every inch of the hallway as they passed through it. There was no wagging tail, no excited energy, just something far deeper, something that felt like knowing. Out in the back garden, Sam Carter sat alone on a wooden bench, under a crooked pecan tree. His posture was slouched, hands resting on his knees, gaze cast far beyond the rustling branches. He looked thinner than in the videos older, too. His silver hair was longer now, curling a bit around the edges of his ears. His face wore the stillness of someone who lived more in memory than in the present. He didn't look up when they approached. Eliza stopped a few feet away, her voice soft. "Missed Carter." No answer. She glanced down at Max, unsure for a moment, but Max didn't need direction. He stepped forward on his own, each footfall like the turning of a page long left unread. He walked until he stood directly in front of the bench. Sam still didn't react. And then Max did something so simple, so familiar, it broke the moment wide open. He lifted one paw slowly, gently, and placed it on Sam's knee. Not a jump, not a scratch, just a firm, deliberate touch. The way he used to. Sam blinked. For a long beat, nothing happened. Then his hands trembled. His eyes, unfocused a moment before, locked onto the dog in front of him. A flicker passed through his face, confusion first, then hesitation, and finally, recognition. His lips parted. His voice cracked. "Buddy." Max held still. Sam's hand, gnarled and slow, reached out and rested on Max's head. A breath hitched in his chest. His fingers curled into the fur, with a memory that didn't need permission to return. "Wait for me," Sam whispered. "I told you to wait." Max leaned in, gently pressing his forehead into Sam's chest, his body folding into the man like a key, finding its lock after years apart. Sam crumpled forward, wrapping his arms around the dog, his entire body shuddering as the tears came fast, unfiltered, and full of every second they had lost. They didn't need words after that, because some things don't return through language. They return through presence. In that embrace, Sam wasn't a man recovering from trauma. He was the trucker with the window rolled down, singing to the wind. He was the soldier who'd survived too much, with a loyal co-pilot always beside him. He was whole again, not through memory, but through love. Max didn't make a sound. He just stayed right there, his heartbeat pressed against Sam's chest, as if reminding him, "You made it back." I never stopped waiting. Eliza stood back, her throat tight, her eyes burning. She had come here, expecting a reunion. What she hadn't expected was how sacred it would feel, like watching two pieces of the same soul finally find their way home. One of the nurses walked by and paused, hand over her mouth. "My God," she murmured. He remembers, for months, Sam had been lost in fog. Some days he forgot where he was. Other days, he remembered fragments, truck stops, army bases, faces without names. But now, wrapped around Max, he looked more awake than he had in years. They stayed like that for nearly an hour. Sam finally spoke again, his voice rough but clear. "I thought I lost him in the crash. I thought I left him." Or worse, Eliza knelt down, her voice gentle. "He's been waiting for 3 years at a shelter window. Every day," Sam nodded slowly. "I told him I'd be back. He believed me." He looked down at Max, eyes watery. "I didn't remember, but he did." The three of them sat in silence as the sky turned lavender and then darkened into night. Lights from the building flickered on, one by one. Max rested his head on Sam's lap, content, as though the entire journey, all the waiting, the silence, the heartbreak had led to this one quiet moment. And for the first time in years, Sam didn't feel broken. He felt found by a dog who remembered not his face, but his heart. They had been separated by accident, by tragedy, by time and memory, but they were never truly apart. Because love like that doesn't disappear. It waits. It endures. And when the moment is right, it comes back, not through grand gestures, but through a single paw on a knee and a whispered promise, finally kept. The sun was just beginning to fall when Eliza stepped out of the rehabilitation center for the last time that day. The air was warm, soft with the hush of early evening, the kind of quiet that wraps itself around you like a gentle goodbye. She didn't speak. She didn't need to, because in front of her, under the curved shadow of a pecan tree, was the image that would stay with her forever. Sam was seated on the same wooden bench as before, only now, His posture was different. His back was straighter. His shoulders, once heavy with something unseen, seemed lighter, like some invisible weight had finally been lifted. And in his arms, curled in total peace, was Max. Max wasn't watching the road. He wasn't listening for tires on gravel or chasing the memory of a blue truck that had passed him by too many times. He was resting, truly resting. His head was nestled against Sam's thigh, eyes gently closed, breath moving in slow waves through his ribs. One of Sam's hands rested on Max's back, fingers moving in quiet, instinctual circles, repetitive and reassuring. The kind of motion that didn't ask for attention but gave comfort just the same. The two of them looked like a painting. Eliza didn't want to disturb, so she didn't. She stood a few steps back, far enough not to intrude, close enough to feel the stillness settle into her chest. The setting sun poured amber light across them, brushing Sam's silver hair and casting soft gold on Max's coat. The wind moved through the trees like an old lullaby. In that moment, the world didn't feel broken. It didn't feel like anything had ever been lost. Because love had returned, and it had sat down on that bench like it had never left. Max didn't stir as a truck passed on the road in the distance. Its engine growled a familiar sound, the kind that once would have made him leap to his feet, tail wagging, heart pounding with expectation. But this time, he didn't react. He didn't need to. The one he had waited for was finally beside him. Eliza swallowed the lump in her throat, her fingers brushing over the journal in her bag. She'd been writing in it since the day she found that old piece of cloth in the shelter's forgotten bin. At first, the journal was just a way to cope with her grief over her father, over the silence, over the empty days that followed him. But now it was something more. It was the story of Max, of loyalty that didn't falter, of memory that refused to fade, of a promise kept, even when the world forgot. Later that evening, Eliza drove back to the shelter. The sun had dipped below the horizon, leaving streaks of peach and violet behind. The old building looked the same as always, humble, quiet, glowing faintly under the porch light. She walked inside, past the rows of kennels, all quieter than usual. Dogs had been fed, bedding changed, everything was still. She moved through the hallway and turned the corner that led to the main room, and there it was, the window. The same tall pane of glass that had once been Max's anchor to hope. It now stood still, empty. The small blanket she used to fold near its edge had been washed and set aside. The wooden sill, worn down by the weight of his paws, caught the soft shine of moonlight. Eliza stepped toward it. She rested her palm on the windowsill, the cool surface grounding her in ways she didn't expect. For months, this had been Max's watchtower, his vigil, his place of silent promise. And now, for the first time, it was simply a window again, not a portal to the past, not a waiting room for lost love, just a piece of glass letting the world in. She took out her journal, flipping to the last page. Her hand trembled slightly as she wrote, the pen moving slower than usual. She paused once or twice, not because she didn't know what to say, but because some words come from such a deep place they have to rise carefully, like breath after grief. Then she wrote, the day Max stopped watching the window was the day love found its way home. She closed the journal and sat down near the spot he used to curl into. For a moment, she simply let herself feel the silence. It wasn't empty now. It was full of memory, of soft thuds of paws against the floor, of the gentle sighs Max used to let out as he drifted to sleep, of the quiet faith that had lived in that corner every single day. Back at the rehab center, Sam was no longer a man searching for clarity. He had found it not in medicine, not in therapy, but in the weight of a dog who never forgot him. The blue truck had been repaired eventually by a mechanic who understood how some vehicles carry more than just engines. It had dents and scratches, but it still ran. It still had Sam's initials carved under the glove box and a dog bowl tucked behind the passenger seat. 1 week after the reunion, Sam and Max drove away from the center. The windows rolled down, the wind catching Max's ears, just the way it used to. Eliza stood at the edge of the driveway, waving as the engine roared to life, not loud, not rushed, just steady. She didn't cry. She smiled. Because some stories don't end. They just find their next chapter. The truck moved slowly over the hill, the back of it disappearing into the trees. From a distance, it looked like any other old pickup meandering down a country road. But inside, there were two hearts, neither of them alone anymore, neither of them waiting. And as the sun dipped once more, painting the sky in soft gold, it felt like that window Max had once watched through was still glowing somewhere, not from the outside in, but from the inside out. Because love, once returned, never really leaves again, Eliza never thought the story would travel far. When she first wrote it down, it wasn't for attention. It wasn't for clicks or likes or shares. It was something quieter, something more sacred, a way to honor the moment she'd witnessed the ones that had changed her, quietly, but forever. She posted it on a modest blog she'd kept over the years, mostly filled with poetry, photographs, and fragments of thoughts she never expected anyone to read. The entry was simple. No clickbait title, no filters or dramatic hashtags. Just a headline that read, "The day the window went quiet." Beneath it, she wrote the story of Max, from the first moment she saw him curled up by the glass, to the day he climbed into her car without hesitation, to the unforgettable moment he laid his paw on Sam's knee and brought the past back to life. She didn't write in grand language. She told it just the way it had happened, with honesty, with warmth, and with the kind of reverence you give only to stories that come once in a lifetime. And at the very end, she added this: love doesn't always speak. Sometimes it waits, and sometimes, when it waits long enough, it finds its way back, not on schedule, not by force, but when the heart is ready, when the path is open, when it's not just the right time but the right soul. Eliza closed her laptop that night, not expecting anything more than a quiet release. But something unexpected happened. People began to read, and then they began to share. First, it was a few fellow shelter workers who had known Max, then someone from a pet rescue in Oregon, then a retired nurse from Vermont, who said it reminded her of the dog her late husband had left behind in war. Then someone else, and someone else. Like a gentle wave, the story moved from screen to screen, city to city, heart to heart. Within days, emails began arriving in Eliza's inbox, messages from strangers. Some were short and simple, "Thank you for this." Others carried stories of their own, of dogs who had waited at hospital doors, of cats who returned home after being gone for years, of husbands who sat by windows after their wives had passed, just to feel close to where they used to be. There were stories of waiting, of faith, of love that had no deadline. Max's story, it seemed, had given people permission to remember their own and to hope again. Eliza hadn't expected any of it, but she welcomed it. She replied to as many as she could, even made a special page on her blog called Letters to the Window, where others could share their own experiences of waiting and what came after. One night, weeks after the blog went viral, Eliza sat at her usual spot by the now empty window at the shelter. She looked outside, just as Max once had, and whispered something to the stars. "Thank you for waiting." And maybe, somewhere out there, Max heard her. The story continued to ripple. It was picked up by a local news station, then a national animal welfare magazine, then a quiet, powerful feature on a Sunday morning show that reached millions of viewers. Not once was it told with spectacle. Always, it was shared the way Eliza intended, with tenderness and truth. Max became a symbol not of fame, but of something rarer, of devotion that endured, of memory that held fast, of the kind of love that doesn't shout, but stays. People began to call him the dog who waited. They spoke of him in schools, in therapy groups, in churches, in book clubs. His story found its way into hearts that hadn't been opened in years, and with it came healing for people who had lost something, for those still waiting at their own windows, for those who thought maybe they had been forgotten, because Max proved something simple but profound. You are not forgotten. Even if the world moves on, even if time passes, even if the wait feels endless, there is love out there that still remembers, and still returns. The last image Eliza ever shared was a photograph not staged, not edited, just a quiet snapshot taken from the hill behind the rehab center. It showed a blue pickup truck rolling slowly down a country road. In the passenger seat, a large Pitbull rested his head on the leg of an old man, both of them looking ahead, not out windows, not behind them, just forward. The caption read, "Not every road leads home, but some. Bring it with them." That was the last post Eliza made on that blog. She didn't need to say more because the story had already done its work. It had spoken to the quiet parts of people's lives and reminded them of something they may have forgotten, that sometimes the love you thought you lost is still out there waiting to return. At the exact moment your heart is ready to receive it. And so, the window stayed quiet, not because no one was looking anymore, but because what was once lost had been found, and the heart that once waited was finally at rest. They say, the heart remembers what the mind forgets. And Max, he remembered everything, not in words, not in memories, but in silence, in waiting, in love. If this story moved you, if you believe in the power of loyalty, of connection, of promises kept beyond reason, please support Veil Marks by subscribing, liking, and sharing this video. Your one action helps bring more true, emotional stories to life. Let us keep telling tales that restore faith and soften hearts. As one wise soul once said, some windows aren't just for looking out, they're for letting love find its way back in. Don't forget to leave a comment, because your voice may be the spark for the next story waiting to be told.